Well, hi there again, Gordon West, WB6NOA, and let's continue on with extra class test preparation, beginning with the section E1F, all about the VEC system. E1F01, who may prepare an Element 4 amateur operator license examination? Now, before we go into that, let's examine the different elements. Element 1, yep, that's for CW. Element 2, technician class. Element 3, general class. Element 4, that's right, extra class. Now, who may prepare an Element 4 amateur operator license exam? Now, prepare, that means make it up. That's an extra class VE or a qualified supplier who selects questions from the appropriate VEC question pool. And where are the questions listed that must be used on all written U.S. amateur license examinations? They're in the VEC maintained question pool. And it's a job to maintain all these questions, and that's part of the question pool committee. Who is responsible for maintaining the questions from which all the exams must be taken? All of the volunteer exam coordinators. And in the back of my exclusive Gordon West book, you'll find a list of all of the coordinators. Who must select from the VEC question pool the set of questions that are administered in an Element 3 examination? Now, Element 3 is, that's right, general class. Well, for the selections of questions, it must be a VE holding an FCC Amateur Extra or Advanced for the general. Who must select from the VE pool Element 2 questions? Well, that would be a VE holding an FCC-issued Technician, General, Advanced, or Amateur Extra Class Operator License Grant. Now, wait a minute. You say a tech can also do a Element 2. Well, we're saying who must select from the VEC question pool the set of questions? This keyword select. So for the selection of questions, yes, the technician may select technician class questions for other examinees to take the exam. All right, let's now talk about the code. What is the purpose of an amateur operator telegraphy examination? Well, the telegraphy exam, that's Element 1 at 5 words a minute, it proves that the examinee has the ability to send correctly by hand and to receive correctly by ear texts in the International Morse code. And probably the code will go away sometimes as a test element, but for right now it's down to 5 words a minute. That's easy as an administered Element 1 examination. What is the purpose of an Element 4 exam? Well, Element 4, it proves the examinee has the qualifications necessary to perform properly the duties of an amateur, that's right, extra class license for Element 4. Now, we've talked about volunteer exam coordinators. What is a volunteer exam coordinator? Well, that's an organization that has entered into an agreement with the Federal Communications Commission to coordinate amateur operator license examinations. And what is an accredited volunteer examiner? That could be you. That's an amateur operator who is approved by a VEC to administer, keyword, administer amateur operator license exams. And a VE team? Well, that's going to be you and a couple of other hams that are all extras, giving everything from extra class tests on down. A VE team is a group of at least 3 volunteer examiners who administer examinations for an amateur operator license. Now, which persons seeking to be volunteer examiners cannot be accredited? Well, that would be anyone who has ever had their amateur operator or station license suspended or revoked. The accreditation process is each VEC ensures that its volunteer examiner applicants meet FCC requirements to serve as a volunteer examiner. And where must the VE team be stationed? Where can they be during the exam? Well, all administering VEs must be present and observing the examinees throughout the entire examination. Once the exam begins, a VE can't like leave the room or go home early. Nope, they have to be there throughout the entire examination process. Now, who's responsible for the proper conduct and necessary supervision during an exam session? That is called the administering volunteer examiners. And what should a VE do if a candidate fails to comply with the examiner's instructions during the test? Immediately terminate the candidate's examination. They must follow your VE rules. What special procedures must a VE team follow for an examinee with a physical disability? Special procedures that accommodate the disability. And they're not necessarily spelled out. You may want to check with your VEC's instruction manual to see what may qualify and what may not qualify. To which of the following examinees may a VE not administer an examination? You may not administer an examination to your own close relatives, and that's listed in the FCC rules. What may be the penalty for a VE who fraudulently administers or certifies an examination? Well, you could have your license revoked and suspension of your VE amateur operator license grant. So that's not good. So make sure that no one on your team fraudulently administers an exam, because everyone is responsible. Now, the next question asks, what must the VE team do with test papers when the examinee has finished the exam? Well, the VE team must collect and grade them immediately. Not later on in the afternoon, but they must grade those tests immediately. What action must the coordinating VEC complete within 10 days of collecting the information from an exam session? Well, they must screen the collected information. They need to resolve any discrepancies, and they need to verify that the VE's certifications are properly completed. In other words, all 3 VEs have signed the CSCE. And for the qualified examinees on an upgrade, they must forward electronically all required data to the FCC. All of these choices are correct. The responsibility, a 10-day one, of the VEC. What must the VE team do if an examinee scores a passing grade on an exam element needed for upgrade for a new license? Wow, passing, that's great. Well, the 3 VEs must certify that the examinee is qualified for the license grant and that they have complied with the VE requirements. And what must the VE team do if the examinee does not score a passing grade on the exam? Well, unfortunately, we have to return the application document to the examinee and let them know the bad news that they have not passed the required grade. And you encourage them to test again soon. Now, occasionally, the Federal Communications Commission may feel that an exam session just was not run correctly and have some or all of the candidates re-exam. That's called a re-administration of an examination when directed by the FCC. Well, the examinees have to do it. The licensee's license will be canceled, and a new license will be issued that is consistent with the exam elements not invalidated. So the examinee must come back and retake that element. Now, when you're ready to take your upcoming Element 4 extra class examination, be sure and bring along the test fee, somewhere around $10. And they ask, what are the types of out-of-pocket expenses for which the FCC rules authorize a VE and a VEC to accept reimbursement? Well, those expenses go for preparing, processing, administering, and coordinating an examination for an amateur radio license. And how much reimbursement may a VE team and VEC accept for all this? Actual out-of-pocket expenses. Normally, again, about $10. And when you pass your exam for extra, you're going to be so happy. You're going to look at that CSCE. That's the paperwork. The CSCE indicates the examinee has passed a specific element or elements within the previous 365 days. And they ask the question, what amateur operator license examination credit must be given for a valid CSCE that an applicant turns in during the exam? Well, the first thing as a VE, you need to double check that this credit indicated on the CSCE is within 365 days, and if it is, each element the CSCE indicates the examinee passed is considered credit. All right, the last two questions out of a big group of a total of 28 questions. Remember, only one of these 28 will be on your test regarding the VEC examination system. But the last two questions deal with CW credit, and they're good ones. And you'll have, when you do testing, you'll have many questions asked about this. The first one says, for what period of time does a technician class licensee who took the tech test and passed it and also passed the 5-word per minute Morse code exam, how much time do they have to operate on the novice technician HF subbands for as long as those HF subbands are still subbands? There's talk about doing away with them. But right now, how much time does that CSCE allow them to operate? Remember, a CSCE is good for how much time? That's right, 365 days. Well, this is a funny one, but it says that once they've passed the code test, they may operate on novice technician HF subbands indefinitely, so long as the tech license remains valid. So if somebody says, yeah, but your CSCE ran out a couple days ago, you only have 365 days, you have to go off the air. No. Once you passed any 5-word per minute code test, that element 1 sticks with you as a tech license indefinitely. Uh-oh, now here comes another one. What period of time does that tech class licensee who just passed the 5-word per minute code test have in order to use this credit on his CSCE or her CSCE toward a license upgrade going for, let's say, general class? Well, now that CSCE only allows 365 days credit. So the credit is for 365 days, as indicated on the CSCE, as credit at passing the code for upgrading the general class when taking the Element 3 general class test. But the CSCE showing that they've passed the 5-word per minute code on the air allows them to stay on the air indefinitely. Got it? A tech passing the code has indefinite on the air credit, but only 365 days to use that code credit as proof of showing that they don't need to take the code again for their upgrade to general class. All right, 28 questions. You may want to review this portion of the audio course and make sure that you got these down, because these will be important as an extra class examiner, and these are important. One will be on your upcoming test. All right, how we're doing. We're going to let you take a break in about another 10 minutes, but let's finish off rules and regulations and take a look at the questions E1G01 through 14, dealing with RF power amplifiers and the quiet zone. You'll have one question out of the next 14 that we'll cover right here. E1G01. What does it mean if the external RF amplifier, remember we can use legally amplifiers in the amateur radio service to boost our power output. What does it mean if an external RF amp is listed on the FCC's database as certified for use in the ham service? Well, it means that that particular RF amplifier model may be marketed for use in the amateur service. In other words, sold by mail order or your local ham radio store. Not all amps meet this criteria and may not be marketed, but those certified may. Which of the following is one of the standards that must be met by an external RF power amplifier if it is to qualify for a grant of certification? Well, it must, first of all, satisfy the spurious emission standards, remember them at the first part of this audio course, when driven by at least, here's the key numbers, 50 watts of mean RF power. 50 watts minimum, which means they cannot necessarily make an amplifier that is going to be used in another radio service illegally. So 50 watts is the certification minimum power level for an RF power amplifier to qualify for a grant. 50 watts. Under what conditions may an equipment dealer sell an external RF power amplifier capable of operating below 144 megahertz if it's not been granted FCC certification? Well, for a dealer, a ham dealer, to sell an RF amp on the worldwide bands, in other words, below 144, they may sell it if it was purchased in used condition from an amateur operator and is sold to another amateur operator for use at that operator's station. So used and sold to another ham. Now, the whole idea here is to make sure that no ham begins making RF amplifiers for high frequency, those that might go 3 to 30 megahertz without much band switching, and start selling them that might work at 5 watts drive into the CB radio service. So the rules are quite clear that down on the HF bands, it's 50 watts of minimum power drive, so that a CB set could not work with this type of amplifier. Which of the following geographic descriptions approximately describes line A? Now, what's line A? Well, line A is up in the Canadian-U.S. border, and line A is a line roughly parallel to and south of the U.S.-Canadian border. And line A is a guard zone to ensure that any of our transmissions down here don't interfere with Canadian hams or Canadian commercial service up there. Amateur stations may not transmit in which frequency segments if they are located north of line A. Well, in Canada, 420 to 430 megahertz is used for other services other than ham. So if you are within line A, and you'll see it on page 48 of my textbook, if you're within that area, you are not allowed to transmit probably amateur television is what we'd find down here, 420 to 430 megahertz. Now, another area that we have to be careful not to transmit in is called the National Radio Quiet Zone. That's an area in Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia surrounding the National Radio Astronomy Observatory. And they're listening at radio frequency level as well, not just looking, but listening. So no transmission unless we get official permission in the National Radio Quiet Zone near Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia surrounding the National Radio Astronomy Observatory. What type of automatically controlled amateur station must not be established in the National Radio Quiet Zone unless you get written permission from the Radio Observatory? Beacon stations would not be allowed. Beacon stations may not be established in the National Radio Quiet Zone unless you get special permission. When may the control operator of a repeater accept payment for providing communication services to another party? The answer is under no circumstances. If you own and operate a repeater, you cannot charge your members for the communications service that you are providing. Now, it is appropriate that some repeater owners will accept donations for the maintenance of the repeater and upkeep. That's okay, but you may not charge your members for providing a communications service. That's not in the amateur spirit nor in the rules. When may an amateur station send a message to a business? Now you'd normally think, oh, never. Well, no, wait a minute. Yep. It's allowed when neither the amateur nor his or her employer has a pecuniary interest in the communications. So it is allowed that if you're out on a boat and you want to send a message to the local marine electronics store that you need a new antenna, that is permissible, just as long as you or your employer has no pecuniary interest in the communications. Which of the following types of amateur operator to amateur operator communications are prohibited? Political is okay, religious okay, languages other than English okay, but prohibited would be communications transmitted for hire or material compensation, except as otherwise provided in the rules. So no transmissions for hire or material compensation. What is the term for emissions using bandwidth expansion modulation? Well, that's a fancy word for, did you get it? That's right, spread spectrum. And FCC licensed amateur stations may use spread spectrum emissions to communicate under which of the following conditions? Well, here they are. When the other station is in an area regulated by the FCC, in other words, USA to USA only spread spectrum. When the other station is in a country permitting spread spectrum communications. If we have another country that is doing spread spectrum, then that would be okay. And we may take part in spread spectrum when the transmission is not used to obscure the meaning of any communications. All of these choices are correct. And what is the maximum transmitter power for spread spectrum? The answer is, that's right, 100 watts. Finally, our last question, E1G14. Which of the following is a use for an auxiliary station? Well, auxiliary stations may provide point-to-point communications uplink between a control point and a remotely controlled station. Yep. Auxiliary stations may provide point-to-point communications downlink between a remotely controlled station and a control point. Yep, that's okay. And they may provide point-to-point control link between a control point and its remotely controlled station. All of these choices are correct. So when you see the words on a test question, auxiliary station, you'll be thinking point-to-point communications. Wow, that's a lot of questions on rules and regulations, huh? Total of 117 questions we've just covered. We're making good progress, heading all the way to 800 questions. Now, on rules and regulations, you'll have 7 exam questions out of the 7 groups. And remember those groups, the first one was frequency, privileges, and emission standards. The second group was station restrictions. The third group was reciprocal operating. The fourth group on the RACI service. The fifth group on amateur satellite service. The sixth group on VECs. The seventh group on power amplifiers. So 7 exam questions will come out of this area. And remember, out of each group, anywhere from 11 to 22 total questions, only 1 will come out of that group. So play this portion of the audio course over so you're familiar with rules and regulations, and then we're going to have some fun and begin operating procedure and then radio wave propagation, and we'll have a lot of these sounds that you're hearing on our radio, and we'll be tuning things around and picking up all sorts of great sounds and telling you what they are. So take a well-deserved break, and I'll let my voice rest. I've been teaching class all over the country. That's why I'm a little bit hoarse, but it's fun taking you through your upcoming 801 extra class question test preparation with 50 questions on the test. You already know 7 right now out of the 50. Okay, see you in a few minutes. Take a break. Wow, pretty neat. Those are the sounds coming from a satellite in space. And our next series of questions, E2A, deal with amateur satellites. What is the direction of an ascending pass for an amateur satellite? Now they say ascending pass, that is from south to north, going up. How about descending pass for an amateur satellite? That is going from north to south. And the period of an amateur satellite is the amount of time it takes for a satellite to complete one orbit. Yep, I wish we had a geostationary satellite that didn't go around at all, but rather followed us around the world. But nope, we have orbiting satellites in elliptical orbits. And these satellites, for one revolution all the way around the Earth, that could take many hours. That is the period of an amateur satellite. Now, looking over my electronic calendar that shows me where the satellites are, looks like we have one that's in view. Now, I'm going to transmit on one band and then listen to my signal on another band. And if I hear my own echo, then I know I've got a good shot at working other stations through the satellite. But the key is I first need to find out where I am. And as I transmit, I listen for my echo. Because remember, the satellite is out there several thousand miles. So there'll be a slight delay. Let's see what happens. Here we go.
Testing 1, 2, 3. This is WB6 Nancy, Ocean, America. Testing for RCMA. Testing for RCMA. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Wow, that's pretty neat. I was able to hear my signal after properly tuning it in. Well, they have 4 questions asked about the receiving and retransmitting frequency bands used for different modes. And the modes are now as follows. Mode H means high frequency, 21 to 30. Mode V means very high frequency, 144 to 148, the 2-meter band. Mode U, that's right, ultra high frequency, 435 to 438 megahertz. And finally, Mode L, that's the L band, 1.260 to 1.270 gigahertz. Well, they asked the question, what are the receiving and retransmitting frequency bands used for these different modes? And if they ask for Mode V with a slant bar and then H, Mode V slant bar H, that would be the satellites will be receiving on 144 to 148, that's the V, and retransmitting on amateur bands H, which is 21 to 30 megahertz. Now, if they should ask for the mode U and a slant bar and a V, mode UV is satellite receiving mode U, 435 to 438, and transmitting, that is actually retransmitting on 144 to 148 megahertz. How about the receiving and retransmitting frequency bands used in mode VU? Well, V is satellite receiving on, that's right, 144 to 148, and retransmitting signals on U, 435 to 438. Finally, the receiving and retransmitting frequency bands for mode L slant bar U. Well, L means that the satellite is receiving on, that's right, 1.260 to 1.270 gigahertz. I know some of you call it gigahertz, but I think the dictionary has it as gigahertz. And the satellite is retransmitting on 435 to 438 megahertz. So to get through one of these 4 questions that might appear on your upcoming test, simply look at the first letter and remember which band that is, and then the second letter and remember which band that is, and then look for the correct answer on the exam. And again, let's go over those bands again. If they should have mode H as the first letter, that is high frequency, 21 to 30, V, very high frequency, 144 to 148, U, ultra high frequency, 435 to 438, and mode L, 1.260 to 1.270 gigahertz. And there you go, 4 questions on the new modes that they have for determining where a satellite is receiving and where it will retransmit your signal. And when you are ready to work the satellite, remember that first letter stands for where you are going to be transmitting, that's where the satellite's receiving, and where you're going to be receiving, that's where the satellite is retransmitting. Okay, I think we got it. Now, if you listen to this signal that we're tuning in on the satellites, it's through what we call a linear transponder. That's a device that receives and retransmits signals of any mode in a certain band. And as we've tuned into a satellite signal now, notice that it sounds like the signal is going higher and higher in pitch. That's because of Doppler effect. What's the name of the effect that causes the downlink frequency of a satellite to vary by several kilohertz during a low Earth orbit? Well, that's called Doppler effect. And one of the Doppler effects you can always tell as to whether the satellite is headed towards you, as this one is, because the signal is consistently getting higher and higher. And as that satellite is going away from you, then the signal will get lower and lower in pitch. Why may the received signal from an amateur satellite exhibit a fairly rapid pulsed fading effect? And that's because the satellite is rotating. And the type of antenna that can be used to minimize the effect of spin modulation and Faraday rotation is a circularly polarized antenna. And finally, our last question on satellites is how may the location of a satellite at a given time be predicted? There is some great satellite software that you can obtain. Joining AMSAT is another great way to get on to finding out about where the satellites are by means of the Keplerian elements for the specified satellites. They sometimes call them KEPs. It's the Keplerian elements that will allow you to determine the location of a satellite at any given time, and you can predict then when you'll have your best opportunity to transmit and have the satellite retransmit your signals that you'll receive back down here on Earth.
Yeah, we're sitting on one.
Now, what on earth is this signal? Oh, you know what that is. That's television, fast scan TV. And our next section, E2B, asks questions about television, amateur television that is. How many times per second is a new frame transmitted in a fast scan TV system? Let me count them. That's right, 30. How many horizontal lines make up a fast scan TV frame? 525. Count them. How is the interlace scanning pattern generated in a fast scan television system? By scanning odd numbered lines in one field and even numbered ones in the next field. And that blanking in a video signal, that's turning off the scanning beam while it is traveling from right to left and from bottom to top. Now, this is a wide amount of signal that I'm picking up, tuning around here, and wow, it's really wide. Well, how wide is a vestigial sideband AM fast scan television transmission? Well, that's why they're up on UHF and higher. We take up 6 megahertz. That's right, 6 megahertz of bandwidth. It's pretty wide, and that's why you won't find fast scan television much below 430 or 420 megahertz, never on the 2-meter band. What is the standard video level in percent peak envelope voltage for black in amateur fast scan TV? All right, black is 70. The blanking in amateur television is 75. And they ask which of the following is not a common method of transmitting accompanying audio with a fast scan television. Usually we would not do amplitude modulation of the video carrier. Nope, that is something that is not common. Amplitude modulation of the video carrier, no. All right, all you sailors, here is something that will be music to your ears. Weather facsimile that you'll be able to pick up with your brand new worldwide ham radio set. Well, hams also transmit fax pictures. And what is facsimile? That's a transmission of printed pictures for permanent display on paper. And what is the modern standard scan rate for a fax image transmitted by an amateur station? And the answer is 240 lines per minute. Now, if you work that out, the approximate transmission time per frame for a fax picture transmitted by amateur stations is, at 240 lines per minute, would take about 3.3 minutes. So 3.5 minutes, or let's make it 3.3 minutes to answer this question correctly on your upcoming test, is what it takes for the transmission time per frame for a fax picture over amateur radio. Now, here's a sound that you've probably heard before on maybe the 2-meter band, maybe even through a repeater, and you just had no idea what in the heck it was. Can you identify that sound? That is slow scan television, sending still pictures over the airwaves. And how many lines are commonly used in each frame of an amateur slow scan color television picture? Either 128 or 256. And the audio frequency for black in the amateur slow scan television is 1500 hertz. And for white, it is 2300 hertz. All right, now you recognize that sound. That is fast scan television. And let's get back to fast scan. Remember, percent envelope voltage, standard video level for black, 70. For blanking, 75. How about white? You know what white is? White is 12.5%. And they ask the question, which of the following is not a characteristic of FM, frequency modulation amateur television, as compared to vestigial sideband AM? Something that FM is not is immunity from fading due to limiting. Yeah, that's what happens with FM. So something that is not with FM, not a characteristic, is immunity from fading due to limiting. Keep in mind that FM, like the AM on fast scan television, is 6 megahertz wide. Wow, that's wide. So there may be fading due to limiting. So immunity from it is something that FM is not. This is one of those not questions. Hey, we're back again to slow scan, and we're tuned in to the 20-meter band, 14.233. Here's a signal, and it's not very wide. They ask the question, what is the approximate bandwidth of a slow scan TV signal? And it could be as narrow as 2 kilohertz. Wow, that's nice and tight. So that is allowed on the worldwide band. And which of the following systems is used to transmit high-quality still images by radio? Still images. Well, that could be, let's see, slow scan, but that's not one of the answers. The other answer that is correct is facsimile. And what special restrictions are imposed on facsimile transmissions? Well, they are allowed in the phone band segments if their bandwidth is no greater than that of a voice signal of the same modulation type. Okay, take a well-deserved rest, take a rest, and then we'll finish out this portion of the audio course beginning with contesting. Take a rest. And you're going to need a rest before a big on-the-air operating event like a contest or meteor showers or something of excitement where hams get on there and just rapidly give their call signs as fast as they can and try and work as many different stations or as many new areas. Oh yeah, things really get rolling during contests. One of the questions they ask is, when operating during a contest, which of these standards should you generally follow? And during contesting, always try and listen before transmitting. Be courteous and don't cause harmful interference to other communications. Well, you can say that you heard it here on audio, but in the real world of contesting, sometimes it really gets frantic out there over the airwaves. And why do they have these contests almost every other weekend on the worldwide bands? Well, we do that to ensure the communicating and operating skills of amateur operators in readiness for an emergency, because when emergency strikes, many times the contesters do some of the best jobs of pulling out those real weak signals. Which of the following is typical of operations during an international amateur radio DX contest? Well, during international contests, sometimes DX operators use split frequency operations, which means transmitting on a frequency band that we're allowed, such as 14.155, but receiving below where we would normally have USA voice, such as 14.145. This is called split operation, and that happens a lot during international amateur radio contests. You need to make sure that you're always operating on transmit in our portion of the band. And boy, today is a great morning for meteors. What do you say we do a little bit of meteor scatter work and see what we can pick up? And listen every time I give my grid square. Delta Mike 13, DM13. Here we go.
CQ, WB6 Nancy Ocean America, WB6 Nancy Ocean America, Delta Mike 13, over.
WB6 Anaway, K7 QSA, Charlie November 91 break.
Yes, K7 QSV, was that right? And Charlie Mike 91, WB6 NOA, go ahead.
Queen X-Ray America break.
Queen X-Ray America, WB6 Nancy Ocean America, Delta Mike 13, 5 and 9.
Yeah, 5 and 9, Gordon, good signal today.
Wow, well that was pretty neat. We were giving our grid square location, and that is a geographic Maidenhead grid location like my Delta Mike 13, based on our current latitude and longitude. And you need to know that for the examination. The geographic Maidenhead grid location based on current latitude and longitude. Now, longitude and latitude grid squares are formed for every 20 degrees of longitude, that's east-west, and every 10 degrees of latitude, north-south. So that's a 20 degree by 10 degree square, and it's assigned in a 2-letter identification. Then each 20 degree by 10 degree square is further divided into 100 2 degree by 1 degree squares, and this is identified with a 2-digit number from 00 to 99. And here's what it sounds like when we give each other grid squares.
Roger, the DN31, you're 59, Bravo, Lima 10, roger, roger.
Okay, roger, roger on that. Now, what is your grid square? You might need to know that. Somebody might ask you. Take a look at my book on page 257 and see if you can identify your own grid square. And keep in mind that grid squares are part of a worldwide numbering system, because they have another question coming up. What does a Maidenhead grid square refer to? It starts off with a 2 degree longitude, and I mean, it goes into a lot of stuff. You can always identify the right answer as a 2 degree longitude, 1 degree latitude squared, as part of a worldwide numbering system. The only answer with worldwide numbering system. Now, during a VHF and UHF contest, in which band section would you expect to find the highest level of contest activity? And it's usually at the bottom of the band, in the weak signal segment of the band, with most of the activity near the calling frequency. And on 2 meters, it's right here at 144, 200.
N7, WB6 Nancy, Ocean America, Delta Mike 13.
WB6 Nancy, NOA, N7 AUV, DN07, 5 and 9.
Okay, you too. The call is WB6 Nancy, Ocean America. Good luck on meteors.
Wow, man, I mean, there's some real excitement out there on the 2-meter airways as well as the other VHF, as well as high frequencies. Now, if you're on high frequency, and if you're in the United States calling a station in Texas on a frequency of 1832 kilohertz, and a station replies that you're in the window, get off my window, what do they mean? Well, it means you're transmitting in a frequency segment that is reserved for international DX contacts by gentleman's agreement. So each band has a band plan, and you want to be sure and stay off of 1832 kilohertz. That's the DX window down on the 160-meter band. Finally, why are received spread spectrum signals so resistant to interference? Well, we're just getting started with spread spectrum, and signals that are not using spread spectrum algorithms are suppressed in the receiver. So that's one reason why spread spectrum signals are resistant to interference. And how does the spread spectrum technique of frequency hopping, called FH, work? The frequency of a transmitted signal is changed very rapidly in spread spectrum according to a particular sequence also used by the receiving station you're working with. Now, when participating with a high-frequency contest, how should you attempt to contact a station calling CQ and stating that he is listening on another specific frequency? Well, you send your full call sign on the listening frequency that the other station is suggesting. Now, when operating single sideband in a VHF contest, how should you attempt to contact a station calling CQ while a pileup of other stations are trying to contact the same station? Well, you just have to hang in there, and you send your full call sign after the other station transmits QRZ, which means I'm listening, who's calling me. All right, well, I'll tell you who's calling. Time to be calling for a break. So take a break. If you're listening to us on an audio cassette course, time to go to your second module. But go ahead and take a break, everyone. Those of you on cassette, go to cassette tape number 2. We'll see you in just a few. Take a well-deserved break, and then we talk about this business called packet radio.